In this talk, I'm going to explain how the non-aggression principle has not actually been debunked, even though some folks say it has been. And I'm going to explain how the explanation they give on how the non-aggression principle isn't always valid is not actually a valid debunking of that principle. So the non-aggression principle, again, is simply stating that the initiation of violence is wrong. It's morally wrong. And it being a sound principle, it doesn't have any exceptions. It always holds true. And the interesting thing here is that it actually corresponds to what Jesus taught us are the greatest commandments. So the greatest commandments, if you're not familiar, are to love God, to love others, and to love yourself. So it's a law of comprehensive love towards basically everyone you could possibly love, right? Those are the three actors in reality, right? There's God, there's other people and animals you can include too. There's other sentient beings, and then there's yourself. So it's simply covering all the bases and saying that the moral law is to express love towards all three of those actors in combination and in balance. And if you're doing that, if you got all three covered, you're not just focusing on loving yourself and neglecting God and others, and likewise, not just loving others but not loving yourself or God, you're covering all three, then that is your moral compass and it will point you in the right direction. And if you pay attention to life, you'll realize that Jesus was absolutely correct. The profundity, if I'm saying that word right, and accuracy of that moral law really is amazing and profound. It really does answer all ethical questions as far as any scenario you happen to find yourself in. Well, what is the choice that loves God, others, and myself? Then whatever the answer is that you can check all three of those boxes, that will be the correct decision. The other part of the greatest commandments of Jesus that is often overlooked, and I say other because the love of yourself is oftentimes disregarded by Paulinist Christianity. They pretend like that's not even a component of the greatest commandments, right? To love others as yourself clearly means you're loving yourself too. There's no logical way to avoid that, yet they just avoid it by ignoring it, and they just talk about loving God and loving others, and they just pretend that Jesus never pointed us to self-love at all. And again, that doesn't even make sense because as far as an ethical philosophy goes, because we are also part of reality, so why would you not love yourself? It doesn't make sense as far as why you would love others and God but totally neglect yourself. It's an inconsistent ethical philosophy, and that doesn't fit the commandments of the Messiah himself, right? Giving us the masterful teaching that he did. So back to the non-aggression principle. The other part of the greatest principle, the other part of the greatest commandments that people don't commonly think about, along with the self-love part, is that if it's a commandment to love, it's also simultaneously a commandment to not do the opposite of love. And it seems that most people do not understand what the opposite of love is. Most people you're going to get a variety of answers. And from my experience, it seems like the most common answer is hate. But that's incorrect, because that's not the kind of love that Jesus was talking about. He wasn't just talking about an extreme like or dislike, right? He was talking about an active love, right? The verb version of love, right? So what is the verb version of the opposite of love? It's abuse. So the greatest commandments are also commandments to not abuse God, not abuse others, and not abuse yourself. So that is inherent in the commandments. It's unavoidable through logic, yet it is avoided for the most part. And that's been a problem, because actually getting our morality straight by following the teachings of Jesus on morality is how we can sort our own personal lives out and sort the world out. So, aggression is actually a form of abuse, along with deception and along with stealing. So, because aggression is a form of abuse, there's actually no valid expression of it, meaning it's always unethical. And preemptive attack is actually a form of aggression. Preemptive attack is initiating violence, initiating aggression against someone because you say or you think that they are going to harm someone else. And so you're attacking them first, you're harming them first to supposedly prevent them from harming someone else. Sometimes you need to use force against someone when they're recklessly endangering someone. And so they say, that is a valid preemptive attack. And they think, see, I debunked the non-aggression principle. I debunked the idea that preemptive attack is a form of abuse, and abuse is always evil. That's what they think, and they think wrong, because reckless endangering actually is a form of aggression. And so if you're responding to that, that is defensive force. And like I said in previous audios on preemptive attack, I said invariably when people think that they have an exception, they're talking about defensive force and labeling it aggression. So that's a false equivalency, which is one of the three categories of all logical fallacies. So they're equating defensive force with aggression and then saying, see, aggression is sometimes good. Okay, so that's the error. Falsely equating defensive force with aggression. If someone is doing something that is clearly endangering the lives of others, that is actually aggressive. Now, some people have wrong ideas of what qualifies as reckless endangering, and that's where the devil in the details lies. But it's not this like unsolvable gray area, and it's not just a matter of opinion. It's not like we can't figure this out and it's a moral relativistic mystery that will never be solved. You can solve it. It's not that complicated. So what qualifies as reckless endangering? The example I just heard earlier today was, okay, imagine someone is holding a gun and they're drunk and they have their they have their finger actually on the trigger. So they're not practicing the gun safety rules whatsoever. They have their finger on the trigger and they're waving it around, completely drunk. They got a bottle of beer in their other hand, and it's clear that at any moment they could easily accidentally pull the trigger and shoot someone and hurt someone, right? So that's clear reckless endangerment, right? And so if someone were to use force to, like, if a couple guys like went up to him and held him down, took the gun out of his hand, and told him to sit down or leave or whatever, but got the gun out of his hand, that would be justifiable. But that action that one or two or three other sober men took against that guy would not be an act of aggression. It's a defensive force, right? They're acting forcefully, but in proportion to the aggression already being committed. They're not killing the guy for unnecessarily. They're just using the amount of force necessary to end the threat. So that's defensive force, which is legitimate because defensive force is actually a form of love. If you are protecting yourself or protecting your child or protecting a stranger from being harmed, that's an expression of love. And so, again, it returns to the greatest commandments. That's why I say this isn't actually complicated. It's just a question of, is it loving or is it abusive? And it always comes down to that. So what's another example of reckless endangering? Say someone, well, obviously sticking with the drunkenness, right? If you're driving a vehicle drunk and, swerving all over the place, well, it's not hypothetical to say it's very likely that you could harm someone. You're just all over the road and it's just a matter of time before you hurt someone, right? Going through intersections, red lights, etc., right? Someone doing that, it's no longer hypothetical. It's like, no, this will cause harm if it's not stopped, right? It's inevitable. Likewise, you could say with someone drunk with their finger on a trigger, well, waving around, falling all over the place in a bar or whatever, well, it's just a matter of time before that trigger is pulled, right? It's basically inevitable. It's not hypothetical. So yeah, drunken use of something that, could easily harm other people. That's not hypothetical. That's clearly an imminent threat, right? In contrast to that would be just someone with a gun in their possession. They're not drunk. They're not waving it around. They don't have their finger on the trigger. They just have it in their possession. They have it on their person, they have it in a holster, or they have it in their car, or they have it in their house, whatever. They have it in their bag, going to the airport. That in and of itself is not reckless endangerment, right? That's black and white. If you think just possessing something like a gun is in and of itself dangerous, you're just wrong. That's just not accurate. That's not reality. There is a clear difference between recklessly using something that could harm others and just being in possession of it and not recklessly endangering anyone with it. Another example of reckless endangering would be like, and this is something I've experienced, like you're walking down a city sidewalk, like a downtown sidewalk, and someone just barrels out of a parking garage, that comes from a building on the block that, the exit goes across the sidewalk, and they don't look before they barrel out of the parking garage, right? So I had it happen where I was just barely not hit, and it was just, you could say chance or luck or whatever, that I just happened to not take it one more step forward when they were speeding out. So that's reckless endangering, right? Because they could have easily harmed someone. If you just fly your car out of parking garages, in the downtown of cities where lots of people are walking around, it's just inevitable that eventually someone's going to get hit by a car doing that. It's no longer hypothetical, and it's just clearly reckless endangering. So when people are doing acts like that, it's appropriate to take force to stop them, to say, hey, you can't do that because you're going to hurt someone, right? Again, that's not the same. You can't say, well, anytime just someone sits in a car or anytime someone drives a car, they're automatically recklessly endangering. No, Again, this isn't like some unsolvable mystery. It's actually, like you could say, common sense perception of what qualifies as actual reckless endangerment and what doesn't. And of course, people like politicians want to push false ideas. They want basically anything against their rule to be qualified as reckless endangering. Um, a classic example, or classic to me, because I've written about it in the past, is the uh, the guy Eric Garner back in New York City who was arrested and killed because he was um, selling cigarettes without a license or whatever. He wasn't, paying taxes. And so they say, oh, then it justifies us to kill this man. No, that's not a legitimate act of force. That's not real defensive force. They just committed violence against him. It's black and white, right? You can't say, oh, not following this extortion law, you're recklessly endangering society, and so we have the right to put you in a chokehold and kill you. No, that's not legitimate. So, getting back to how the non-aggression principle has not been debunked, when people are pointing to reckless endangerment and they think, oh, well, that's an exception because they think, oh, well, that's not really the initiation of violence, and so it's okay to sometimes use force against something that is not aggression, right? Again, that's incorrect because the reckless endangerment actually is a form of aggression. And so if you're taking force against that, that's defensive force. So you haven't actually committed aggression yourself in response to that reckless endangerment because the reckless endangerment is a form of aggression. You see? Aggression bad, defense okay. Again, this is not complicated. Aggression is bad, reckless endangerment is a form of aggression. But again, you can't just willy-nilly call things reckless endangerment. Like, oh, if you don't take whatever pharmaceutical drug, big pharma and their politician partners want you to take, then you're endangering society. No, that's hypothetical, to put it mildly. That's not a definite reckless endangerment. Saying whatever drugs politicians want me to take, to not do so is, being an irresponsible citizen and I'm recklessly endangering others. That's not valid. I mean, it just doesn't hold up to scrutiny. You can't equate reckless endangerment, like previous examples I've given, with you have to take any drug that politicians want you to take. Otherwise, you're recklessly endangering others. I mean, the truth is more arguably the opposite, that saying that we need to inject ourselves and our children with whatever politicians want us to now and forever, that's actually endangering society more than compliance with that medical tyranny. So again, just common sense, being able to discern between what actually qualifies as reckless endangerment and what doesn't. But again, the non-aggression principle has not been debunked. And on a deeper ethical level, that's because aggression is actually a form of abuse, and abuse is a violation of the greatest commandments, and the greatest commandments are the perfect moral law given by the Messiah. There's no exceptions. He didn't say, these are the greatest commandments unless, a politician says otherwise, or unless there's a crisis, No, it's the perfect moral law. It's the moral absolutist view that, apparently 99% of humanity has been indoctrinated to think isn't really the most intelligent ethical perspective, right? Moral relativism is parroted, especially through universities, as wisdom, and the idea that you can designate anything 100% evil 100% of the time, they immediately put up their noses and think that they know better than Jesus, and they don't, which you can verify through your own life experience and through reasoning, as I'm attempting to express now, or just now. All right, so I hope that helped you recognize that the non-aggression principle really is valid, and like I said, even more importantly, and on a deeper level, that the greatest commandments of Jesus really are the perfect moral law that can guide our personal lives and society as a whole. All right, thanks for listening.